Aloha pu mehana kākou, pehea o kou, a o oe e mehana o ka la pehea oe.
Well, mai ka'i loa wau a o oi.
Mai ka i shua.
Mai ka'i. And mahalo to all of you for joining us for Midday Manaʻo with Manu and Mehana.
And we said, midday Manaʻo, Mehana and Manu. And there's maybe going to be a midnight Manaʻo at some point, but not yet.
Now that we have Halealoha here, maybe.
Oh, yeah, he would have been perfect for
Welcome for joining us on Midday Manaʻo here every Friday, avakea time, with your two favorite cousins up here. And we also always have special guests that we bring forward from the Lahui to all of you to discuss issues that are concerning to our ohana and our communities out there. And today we have someone that me and Manu both know so very well.
Wait, how's about a shout out to our sponsors?
Yeah, we can shout out them now. Aloha to, of course, the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement. I work for the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement as a Senior Director of Community Programs. Of course, Manu works at Kamehameha Schools. Just so people don't get confused, he spends his lunch breaks.
Yes, I'm here on my lunch hour, but Imua Kamehameha.
Yes, Imua. I am
at Go Kansas City Chiefs.
Oh my goodness! Here we go. When is the NBA gonna start? Yeah, and again, I'm surrounded by the children of Pauahi with both graduates of Kamehameha here. But
you can't throw a stone anywhere without hitting it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we're gonna bring on some other more public school people pretty soon, to join me on here. But for today, right? yes, we can. Yeah, but today we have Halealoha from the island of Molokai, but now resides on the island of Mokuʻikeawe. With his, children and ohana and does amazing work he does a bunch of different things. But of course, Halealoha is known for his work, the important work of bringing home and kanuhoʻia, returning to the pole, our ʻiwi Kūpuna. Halealoha, aloha.
How for me.
Yeah, tell us anything that I missed in my introduction about you. Yeah,
well, first of all, Halealoha, we call him Love Shack. And that's only between us, so just keep it. Yeah, okay.
So you said 2 M's or 3 M's?
Right.
Mehana, what's the third one?
Midday Manaʻo.
Male?
Oh. So
yeah. You're cousins.
Right. It would be very Hawaii.
Yeah. So we go back a long time, and our good hoʻaloha about Mehana's introduction about kana hana koʻikoʻi, ka hoʻihoʻi ana mai i nā ʻiwi Kūpuna i Hawaii nei. Very, very specific and important work. Tell us about that. Some of our friends out there may not become an aina.
The work we do is part of a kuleana or responsibility that we were reawakened to, because it's always been our responsibility. It's always been our kuleana. But this nasty thing called colonialism and Christianity came along and had us look somewhere else instead of into our own ancestry and our responsibilities to that ancestry. And that occurred on the island of Maui at Honokahua. Mm-hmm. And so,
what year was that?
1988. Were you born in?
I was 3 years old, right around that time.
Yeah, I was. Around that time.
1988.
Uncle Charlie Maxwell. Talk about him.
Yes. So Uncle Charlie Maxwell was one of the founding members of Hui Maulama Ina Kūpuna o Hawaii nei. He's also a founding member of Aloha Foundation. Aloha Association. Advocate, outspoken Aloha Aina advocate for ka hoʻōlave. Makes beautiful goat leis that he presented to the U.S. Navy. His grandson works with us in Hui'iwi Kuamo'o to continue his grandfather's work to Malama Iwi Kūpuna.
Yeah.
And which mo'opuna is that?
Digi.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the other mo'opuna is Adrian Kamali'i.
Yes, Adrian, cousin of Adrian.
Everybody's so busy.
So in 1988, this hotel is being built. There's a huge disturbance, a huge crime that happened, basically, at Honokahua with the unearthing.
Humanity.
Right. With the unearthing of over, 1,300 of our Kūpuna?
1,100.
1,100 of our Kūpuna at that time. So that's circa 1988. Are you in law school at that time?
Second year in law school, University of Colorado.
And you're also at this time doing work with some of the frontiersmen, but for this particular issue,
Yes.
right? In Native American country.
Yeah, I clerked at the Native American Rights Fund, which is a Native American law firm in Boulder, Colorado. And at the time, I was clerking for a lawyer named Walter Eckelhawk. And Walter Eckelhawk, if you know his name, was one of the founding fathers of the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act.
So how was that? Circa, you're in the late 80s, going into the 90s. There's a lot of activity happening home here at that time around the sovereignty movement, right? 93 is just a few years away, where attention gets thrown into, the overthrow, conversations about the overthrow. But there is this, this mass disruption that happens on Maui. Your way being kind of molded by the leaders, the legal minds at that time, shaping policy for the United States on Native American graves and protection.
NAGPRA.
How was that experience working with Baltimore?
Real quickly, I always thought that actually it was a Honokahua issue that actually was the impetus of NAGPRA.
No.
But
it was early.
State law. For the
State law.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, not
Clarification.
NAGPRA.
Right. So, just in terms of timeline, I had no desire to do what I'm doing now.
Right.
Because the training I was receiving was in federal Indian law, and that was to work on sovereignty issues, like Mehana said. That was the focus. That was the game plan when I came home. I had worked on ʻiwi issues for the Pawnee Indian tribe because Walter Eckelhawk is Pawnee. And so I was exposed to it. Honokahua was happening. I got to get involved in it. It was something I cared a lot about, but certainly not what the career projection was going to be.
Right.
But then I come home, and while I'm studying for the bar, I have dinner with my grandmother, Harriet Nay, and she had my high school graduation picture on her dining table. So I told her, "Oh, you brought it out just for tonight for the dinner?" She said, "No, it's been there the whole time you were gone." I was praying to make sure you don't get lost and not find your way home.
Your seat at the table right there.
And I was like, whoa. And then I told her, "Well, you're going to be happy to know I'm going to work on what's called sovereignty grams." "You know sovereignty?" And she said, "Yeah, that's to do with our kingdom." I said, "Yeah." So I started talking when she put her hand. And she said something very cryptic, which nothing to me at the time. I thought maybe she didn't take her meds or something. She says, the house cannot stand, something to the effect that the house cannot stand firm or strong again until its foundation is firm. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about?
Right.
And I said, "Grams, I'm talking about our sovereignty, our kingdom." And she said, "Yeah, but we cannot restore it until our ancestors are returned." You see, they took our ancestors. They took our foundation out from under us.
Now that's key to your whole life trajectory.
Right? That's when it flips. I was like, wait, what?
That's what ʻiwi and ʻōiwi. I want to just say one thing and send some aloha out to the memory of your tutu of Harriet Nay of Molokai. If you have not heard that name, she was a well-known old school kumuhula on that island, and so she really her foundation, as you mentioned about her Manaʻo about the kahoʻihoʻi anamai o nā ʻiwi, is also rooted in her tradition, several traditions, but hula was one. So this guy, he can dance hula too.
I can.
Well, I would say he knows like one move, one step in the hula. I'll vouch for that. Yeah, I'll vouch for that one. Yeah, he's work on the rest of them. But yeah, and so you have that just impactful. You didn't know at that time how impactful that was going to be.
No.
But you have that conversation. You're full of energy, like most ʻiwi who are in college at that time, right? I remember when I got immersed in college and got immersed in the movement, right? You have all this energy, right? And a building frustration at the same time because you want everything to happen at that time. Honokahua happens. on Maui. When do you get introduced to Edward and Paul Kanahele?
During my third year in law school, Emmett Aluli flies me back for makahiki on Kaho'olawe, and then he takes me to Honokahua. And it was the first time that I experienced, well, actually, the second time I experienced being around ʻiwi, but first time in a mass setting like that, and it was incredibly painful. And I remembered, that I'm going to try to help in whatever way I could. Back then, like you said, we're full of idealism, but low on ike.
Right.
We just wanted to charge. We just didn't know what direction.
Right.
Also, at that time, and as Mehana had mentioned, Auntie Pua, Kanaka Ole Kanahele, and Uncle Ed Kanahele, at that Honokahua site as well, you begin to see a re-emergence of ceremony.
Yes.
Because and some of these ceremonies have to be sort of reformatted or recreated because the hana created, but based on like your grandma's Manaʻo, the tradition. So a little bit about that, about your experience in the beginning with Hawaiian ceremony.
Being the truly U.S. manufactured student out of Kamehameha, I thought the law was the answer.
Right.
That's why I went to law school.
Right.
And then I came
Wait,
home
who
and
manufactured you? What?
Wait, let him continue.
KS did. And so this is what I'm thinking. The law. Right. And then I come home and I meet these two very powerful Hawaiians. And then I realize the law is a tool, but absent the foundation, and especially in ceremony, that was the missing piece.
Right.
And that the people that I had surrounded myself with at the time, that's when I understood the difference between culture and political culture. Because I thought they was the same.
Right.
And then I realized with Uncle Ed and Auntie Pua that they were about returning us, as she's always said, returning us to who we are.
Right.
So all of their lessons have to do with knowing who you are, calling upon those Kūpuna to help guide you in what you have to do. But having that as your that's the base. Not the law, not all whatever else confusion you make.
Right.
That's the base. And then use your other tools that you've acquired over time to implement that.
And so that's been so significant. What you guys talked about right before this about the ceremony, right? And the creation of it. This is why today I have no problem, none whatsoever, in creating the ceremony that's needed for us today. Right. Because once you understand the foundational kind of principles of why, asking the question and answering why you are doing this, right? And you have the language and the kind of process, you have to, and in certain times, because there wasn't this mass unearthing in our history of 1,300 Kūpuna, right, done for the sake of development, right? So you create it, and I've always seen that as such a courageous and much needed shift, like that time in circa 1988, 89, 90, there was this total huli, that happened in what we believed our foundation was, right, and how to move forward from there.
Right.
It's interesting. So for those of you who are not familiar with Honokahua, when you're on Maui and you pass Lahaina, you pass Ka'anapali, and you go further up north, you come to an area that's also known as Kahana and then Kapalua. And then down at the bottom is Honokahua. Interesting that the bay of a foundation, that kahua, maybe serendipitously. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
We both went
But no, and that's a good body surfing beach. So if you're on Maui that side, take your fins. But so.
That happens, and then how long from there does Hui Malama get created?
That was the
beginning.
The events
the Hano,
that establishes Hui Malama. Uncle Ed realized that Hawaiians had been sleeping at the wheel, so to speak, of this cultural responsibility, and that the best response to a cultural problem was ceremony. But at the same time, they realized that they needed to make sure this episode didn't repeat itself. Unfortunately, it does. at Kūpuna years later. But they wanted to make sure it doesn't, and so that's where I step in. And we they went to the legislature that year to pass a new law that would provide more protection to all Hawaiian burial sites. DLNR had established the interim island burial councils. This law would make them permanent. But then the law was killed by a mysterious force, like the Sith.
Right.
Nobody knew.
Nobody knew who.
But it turns out it was a very powerful developer, the most powerful developer in Hawaii. And so the following year, after I graduate, we take up that legislation, go back to the community, consult again, make certain changes, and then proceed and get the law passed because we got that powerful developer to agree to sign off. So, mahalo Bishop Estate.
I just going to say, Imua. One of the things, there's a movie out there, by the way. This was captured in a documentary called Nāwaie hoʻōla ʻiwi, Kūpuna by Nāmakao Ka'aina. If you guys are not familiar with Nāmakao Ka'aina, you can go to their website or go to OEV TV and check out that collection because it talks and it's from that time period of this legislation moving forward. And then since then, Halealoha, or right after that, right, you start to shape what the state historic preservation within the Department of Land and Natural Resources, and they have the kuleana to be the kind of government body that is a nexus between the developer and any of the value systems, I want to say, or the community, basically. But the value systems that Hawaii wants to keep promulgating, right? And so DLNR sits at that nexus. State Historic Preservation is right within it. And
SHPD was created at that time.
Oh, wow.
At the same time. There was no SHPD before that.
Okay.
Historic preservation issues were handled by state parks at the
Right.
And SHPD was finally.
That's where Mauna Ala lives still.
Correct.
But I want to point out, because we have a lot of younger audience members too, Keiki Hawaii, Opio Hawaii. The time we're talking about here, the mid-1980s, 1988, is also just after the establishment of the Punanaleo Hawaiian language preschools, and then in the Department of Education, Kulakaya Puni Hawaii, Hawaiian language immersion schools in the DOE. So it really is a reawakening, and we have to remember, because we can look back and be critical about who did what, but many of our generations were really disenfranchised from cultural understanding. So many things survived. Many things we continue to do today, but many things we didn't. And I think where you're talking about, especially with the Kanaka Foundation and Atipuama, is ceremony and the need for ceremony.
Right. So in her words, returning to who we are. So getting the burial law passed was meant to address burials that are already in place or otherwise in Hawaii.
Yeah.
But what we didn't realize was how many were outside of Hawaii. And so at that time, the first of the two repatriation laws are passed. Oh, by the way, I get hired by Senator Inouye because I testified at a Hawaiian Homes hearing, at an oversight hearing on Molokai, in which the State Attorney General had the audacity to say that there was a legal question whether there was an illegal overthrow or whether the Queen actually wanted America to take over. And I was like, well, I'm not putting up with that shit. Yeah. So I stepped in and corrected him. And so the next day, Senator Inouye's staff comes to me and says, the senator wants to speak to you. And I thought I was getting called into the principal's office.
Right. You thought you were going to get a putty.
But
instead I got hired. Because he was like, I need someone to tell me what's really going on. I'm like, yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't want that.
I do. Wink. I do.
And good for him to recognize you. He did need you.
He did, because at that time, he was the chair of the Senate Select Committee on Indian Affairs, and they were considering legislation to build the National Museum of the American Indian.
Okay. Wow.
And the trade-off for that, that was a staff recommendation, was that they required the Smithsonian to inventory, identify, and repatriate its Native American remains collection, and to include Native Hawaiians. So Kuleana is first included in that law along with OHA. Then a year later, during that year, they had the consultations on NAGPRA. And then NAGPRA, so that law only applied to the Smithsonian.
That was a federal law.
Federal law
That went
enacted by Congress.
Enacted by Congress.
So 1
with
year
Smithsonian.
later, they enact NAGPRA to apply to all museums, federal agencies, or entities that receive federal funding. So Congress can only legislate, there has to be a federal connection, otherwise it violates federalism. So the federal connection, the nexus is funding.
So the word in that acronym NAGPRA, the repatriation, and that concept is about returning something to its place of origin. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
And so, and I'm curious, a couple of things. What was the inventory at the Smithsonian? That's one question, and maybe to follow up, what is it about the 19th century anthropologists or scientists, or even 18th century explorers, and what was the interest in ʻiwi, in skeletal remains? Because in European cultures and American culture, even at a pāʻilina, at a graveyard, those things are considered, if in their thinking, kapu. But what was the reason?
So the answer is actually in the question you asked. It's kapu if it's white. Everything else is the reason why they dug them up. So, the rationale was to justify white supremacy.
But to do what with the? I don't
Scientifically, right? So
scientifically prove that we are smarter, and that's why we enslave people. That's why we massacre people. We do all this because we are the masters of the world, and to prove that to you, we have all your stuff in our museum,
and we have
your ancestors in our museum.
And we have scraped them. We have cut their bones. We have filled their skulls with
So that's one of the hallmarks of colonialism, is that they went worldwide and did this. And Hawaii was one of the places they did it, but it was to justify, all of these policies, these racially based policies that sought to disenfranchise indigenous people.
And some of the roadblocks that exist today, right? So we were talking about the late 80s, early 90s, and let's kind of jump forward. And I don't want to dismiss all that work, because that was a lifetime.
That was a ground floor.
But even till today, that persistence, we see it possibly less and less now, right? There's a little bit more. Halealoha has always trained many of us to speak to the humanity within the person that's right in front of us, because we know somewhere in their kino, no matter if their exterior can be still racist or part of a colonial system, and they protect that system, to
Sometimes
speak to the humanity. Yeah, unknowingly. That's
Yeah.
right. We speak to the humanity, and it's been a lesson. I must say, I honor you for this, because you've taught me a lot of patience in that, because I'm not such a believer in the goodness of all people who perpetuate systems of racism.
That was eloquently said.
Yeah, but you have taught me to really connect with the individuals at these institutions, to be able to seek out the humanity in them, and for them to see the humanity in us.
So here's a couple examples. One, we're in Cambridge. We're talking to the officials there.
In Cambridge University in England.
They have the Duckworth Laboratory, and so this very intelligent white man is saying to me, after an hour of being lectured that science is objective, whereas culture subjective, and therefore fraught with emotion. So that's why we cannot follow cultural ways. We got to follow scientific ways. Scientific ways, and that's why we have the remains.
Fraught with emotion.
Whatever. He's entitled to his opinion. This is where he crosses the line. He says, so therefore, this skeletal material, this osteological material, is the lawful property of Cambridge University. So in one sentence, he said the most racist thing he could have said. One, he dehumanized our Kūpuna, turned them into objects.
And property.
Into their property, owned. And when he did that, he did the very same thing to us. So I told him, sir, that you are an excellent example. And he was already all puffy. I said, of what I call an intellectual savage. And he was like, what? what? And he stood up. I was like, sit down, lest you be thought of as being emotional.
Yeah,
Cultural,
Irrational,
Sit
yeah,
down, sit down.
unobjective.
Let me define intellectual savage so you know why you should be mad at me. An intellectual
Interesting.
savage is someone who uses their intellect to deny another their humanity.
You know. It's just, I'm gonna give it.
We should sit with that
Okay,
just
okay,
for
okay.
a second. Just for a second. Because that is something that existed back in the 17th and 18th centuries,
Right. It was
19th
automatic.
centuries. That
They
that
would just
was
say
the
it without-
practice. But
without-
this is 2022. 2020, 2021, 2022 that this
Yeah.
is happening.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right. And so this
How
idea of
backward.
intellectual savagery, and go ahead, go use a term, say, na Halealoha Ayau, I haku ia. But use it whenever you face that type of very in your face.
Here's a more subtle one. So we're on, just about a week ago, we're on a Zoom call with this museum in France. And they kept referring to their collection of Hawaiian skeletal material. So I told them, excuse me, a collection in a museum normally refers in my mind to something you lawfully collected, acquired. So show us where a Hawaiian family said, please take grandma's head. We don't need it anymore.
Right.
For every single one that you have. Otherwise, don't you ever refer to our kupuna as your collection.
Right.
As Noel Kahanu pointed out to me very aptly, that when you advocate for repatriation, you are involved in hostage negotiations. Because that's what it amounts to.
I wanted to interject there, but Mehana, she's the boss, so she just but no, I remember when I worked at Bishop Museum, and there was a publication at that time, and it's another reflection of a 19th century museum mindset, and talking about our mea makamai, mea vaivai loa, the things from the lehulu and the ahu'ula and what have you, referring to them as artificial curiosities.
Right.
Now that is something. No, I'm
Right.
gonna.
That's Kepler.
You're right.
That was Kepler.
No,
Right.
Mehana Hind also has been involved in this process, and I wanna talk about, and because repatriation, ka ho'i ho'i ana mai, ina mea no kahiko mai, returning things back to Hawaii. Not only ʻiwi, and I can we talk about Te Papa and about the ahu'ula of Kalaniʻo?
Sure.
By the way, which is my favorite repatriation because I didn't have to do anything and I came home.
He always says that. I didn't have to do any of it. You guys did all of that.
This is something that's really important, though. But that's an example of something. It's not ʻiwi, but it's something. And maybe about the ano of Te Papa Museum in is it Wellington?
Yep. And so there's another great documentary on this. You can go to the OHA website. It's called Na Lehua. And it kind of chronicles that whole journey of getting the ahu'ula of Kalaniʻo and returning it back home to Hawaii. But Te Papa Museum, it's good that we talk about this because the behavior that they exhibited is what we want to hope for institutions around the world, right? Even those who are in America who still have not completed, right? Sadly, so have not completed their repatriations or of our kupuna back home to Hawaii. But Te Papa did a very remarkable thing. There was a group of us who went down in 2014. And we were there to survey their collections on behalf of Bishop Museum had a grant, and so a bunch of practitioners went down, and we actually went to all the museums in Aotearoa and one museum in Australia. And when we went to Te Papa, we got asked the question, your ahu'ula of Kalaniʻo, do you want to take it home? Right, so we all thought we weren't hearing right. We were just like, wait.
Yeah, museums don't typically ask that question.
Right? Exactly. Museums are hoarders by nature, right? They beat any hoarder you see on a TV show, right? They and they are very protective of what they consider theirs. So to hear this was odd, was strange. the hopena of that, right, is 2 years. In 2016, we go down and ceremonially retrieve it from Aotearoa, bring it home to Hawaii, and now it sits here on Oahu. But Te Papa has been, for their people, it's still complex, even for them, because they are still a museum. They still have material culture and artifacts, of other cultures within their collections. Yeah. But you can see the earnest in the trying and in the actions of actually having these very difficult discussions, right? So the last repatriation I went on, it wasn't actually anything from Te Papa, but Te Papa went ahead and provided the space to bridge our kupuna who were coming from the South Island up to Wellington, and then we were able to connect with them on Te Papa's grounds.
So explain why Te Papa steps in.
So there was a museum in the South Island who I previously visited, who had told me straight to my face, every museum, every institution I go to, every college laboratory that I just so happen to be in, my first question always to the curation team or the leadership is, do you have any of our ʻiwi kupuna here? Right, and then I will usually define it if necessary. If they don't know what ʻiwi kupuna is, I tell them, do you have any of our ancestral remains within your collection? Right, and usually the answer is, it's either yes or a no. Right, if it's yes, then it's okay, halealoha, we have a problem, right? Houston, we have a problem. We start moving that way. Well, when I went to this particular museum, the Canterbury Museum in South Island, they told me straight out, no, we do not have your ancestors here. And then luckily there's a network of people who are concerned with repatriations all across the world, indigenous peoples all across the world, who keep in touch with each other. And by way of that network, we were able to find out that they in fact had 3 of our kupuna there. Now, I was not only just professionally bothered by that interaction and like kind of like the bold-faced lie, that occurred there. But I was incensed that I was there. I was at that museum surveying their collections of other Hawaii for about 3 to 4 days. And the fact that I did not come home with them, bothered me intensely, and just full of all kind of rage.
So you ended up coming home with them.
And I did end up coming home with them. It was just and mahalo Halealoha for always giving us opportunity to reconnect
right place, right
and
time.
Build our foundations. Right, that's such an important quality of the way that Halealoha teaches leadership, is by completing. You always complete that circle. You make that. Promise, you make that commitment to the kupuna and you bring them home. And so we were able to bring home those 3 kupuna back to Hawaii in a whirlwind, less than 24 hours. There were many obstacles. And the biggest obstacle that we face till today, right? One of the biggest obstacles, it can be, yes, the inhumane practices of laboratories. It can be the warped sense of thinking that, and so passé, actually. It's so out of touch for this day and age, right, of the museums, is one of the biggest hurdles that we face till this day is our own people.
Right.
And our own institutions. Who at that time, I was, of course, going down on behalf of the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement and in full support of Hui Iwi Kua Mo'o. And we were blocked and then unblocked by one of our very own institutions here in Hawaii, right? So this is just, and I say it like that to give just a note of just personal courage and leadership, right, to people who are out there, who are in the position to make the return of our ʻiwi kupuna happen or not happen. That is not a power that you should wield into the negative. of against our own people, right? This is a mission that we all have to be on the same side on. There is no Kanaka out there who should say that it is not a good time for ʻiwi Kūpuna to come home, ever. That should just not be uttered out of anyone's mouth.
I want to comment on Mehana Okala also. Now, she is a kumuhula as well. We're all poʻehula here too. But one of our deities, Hi'iaka Ikapolio Pele, and this is something for the younger kids to know about, is that she was an expert in getting through obstacles. And that is a Hawaiian trait of character that we remember, Hi'iaka. When you're having a hard time with something, think about Hi'iaka and how she thought things through. I also want to go back to we were talking earlier about Te Papa, and I want to explain, because I think some people might know. Well, Te Papa is the south part of North Island in Aotearoa, which is New Zealand. But what was returned, we use the term ahu'ula. And ahu'ula is a long feather cloak, extremely valuable and filled with mana. But I wanted to also mention Kalani Opu'u. That was his ahu'ula. And who is Kalani Opu'u? So he is the uncle of Kamehameha. He's a half-brother of Keoua. He was also, we see a lot of those old lithographs. And this is just part of our history of Kealakekua Bay in 1779. Captain Cook, or Kapena Kuke as we refer to him, but Kalani Opu'u was the king of the Ali'inui of Hawaii Island at that time. So just to put it in perspective, so for something, from someone like that to be, or something, ahu'ula, and again, not necessarily ʻiwi Kūpuna. These are just things that need to make their way home because they're part of the mana and the spirit and the essence of all of us. And if you ever have a chance to go to Kaiwiʻula, which is the name of the land, Halealoha Ike o Kamehameha, or Pihopa Bishop Museum, and if it's on display, go see it. It's amazing. And for Te Papa Museum to have suggested or offered is not typical, and that's a good la'ana.
It's the only instance I know of, but we hope that it is not the last.
Anyway, I want to just add that in.
Yeah, no, mahalo,
you can get your hi'iaka on.
And speaking of right, and speaking of that, what's that hi'iaka? Right, it hasn't stopped. Right, we're still traversing around the world and bringing home our kupuna. To date, you have brought home over 6,500 kupuna from around the world. Now that is not. It sounds like okay, that's you could do that.
Sometimes it's just one.
Sometimes it's one from one institution, and sometimes it's more. But it's never easy. But the kupuna always help us bring them home once we get there.
I'm raising my hand again. I'm so sorry, Mehana, because again, she is the boss, and me and Halealoha, we know that. But I want to back to Hi'iaka Ikapolio Pele. She had a traveling companion whose name was Wahine o Ma'o, green woman, and there's a chant which talks exactly about that, about persevering, o ku, o ka, o Wahine o Ma'o. And that has to do with the stepping. You keep moving forward and you keep going because the journey is not pau. So, o ku, o ka, o wahine o ma'o. And hi'iaka ikapolio.
Oh, nani. Mahalo, Manu. That was nani. Yeah. And so the journey still continues.
So let me say this. When, because I was asked this really provocative question by actually a woman from Nepal. We were in Vienna, and she says, I'm surprised that you guys are bringing home your ancestors and not your gods. Like, why did you prioritize your people over your gods? And so I said, well, that's a Puakanaka'ole style level question. But the answer is simple, that we have to be, focused, strengthened to be able to do that work.
Right.
So we prioritize our families first.
Back to what your grandmother said.
That's what
exactly
I was told.
What she said.
And so that was. I find out years later that she was referring to when Bishop Museum comes to Molokai in the 50s and raids Mo'omoi.
Oh.
That's what. And when she was saying La Hui, she was referring to Molokai.
Right.
So when
You
you say
Molokai
this, she was
people.
like, I was
Right.
only talking I was like, not me.
Yeah, and Mo'omomi, of course, and this is another, I don't know if we're going to get fully to this question, but, Mo'omomi, of course, the sand dunes of Molokai, a lot where our ʻiwi Kūpuna were returned into the pool was into the sand dunes. And Mo'omomi, the raid that happened where Bishop Museum goes, right, and raids all the ʻiwi from Mo'omomi and a few other things that you guys have spent time repatriating back to the island, like the footsteps, playing off of what Manu, has gone back to Molokai. But so the sea line, the aikai, the kahakai, right, is
Shoreline,
what? The
you mean,
shoreline. I know.
See,
I was like, sea
But
line,
your
sea
aikai
line.
and kahakai, two
Yeah, I was
great
just like,
examples.
too easy,
words
just-
for shoreline.
Yes,
That's
I
how
have
they
to
tie it,
speak.
Manoʻo.
And
No,
let-
it's
let's
easier
add
just to
one
speak
more,
it in Hawaii.
lihikai also.
Lihikai, yes. So I was like, I don't know how to say it in English, but in Hawaiian,
Yeah.
it is aikai and kahakai. And, well, that's eroding, right? And so more and more of our ʻiwi Kūpuna are being unearthed. On the island of Maui is probably very prominent, but of course, all our islands, all of our islands, right? All of our islands are facing this, right? So, what do you see on this? With all this happening, right? What is it important for us to know?
Okay, so maybe it's kind of a roundabout way of answering it. I would say that's the number one question I get asked
Right.
for years, not just recently with climate change. This is something that's been going on always.
Well, that's a good question.
If you read
Yeah.
journals from the 1800s, the Germans are describing Manaʻo and the eroding dunes in
right.
the 1800s.
Right.
So, and to me, the answer is this. It depends what the families of that area say.
Yeah.
So the first time I was exposed to that issue, it occurred in Ka'u. And Halealoha said, no, leave them alone. Our ancestors anticipated the transition from Papa to Kanaloa. Let it go. Protect the process of the transfer.
Yeah.
Right.
Another community here on Oahu, they're like, no, recover them and take them Mauka
Yeah.
and put them there. So then I've seen enough of these cases to realize that the answer is what the families say.
Right.
Mahalo for that, because usually as lawmakers, as legislators, as policy,
We're trying to
advocates,
make one size fits all.
Yeah,
And
no.
we often try to make one size fits all. We forget that even our island makeup and our ohanas, we're very regional people.
Yes.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
We're not a
It's not a
one size fits all.
Who
Yeah.
don't care what Waianae thinks.
Right.
I wanna,
right.
But again, I think we have a lot of our listeners and watchers out there who maybe don't really understand this, but there is a process or a practice in traditional times, and these are either pu'uone or pu'eone burials, and they happen in sand dunes. A good example on Oahu Nei is Waimanalo. That's one. And the other thing is, and this really ties into everything we're saying because it can be a very broad interpretation, but the ʻŌiwi Ayau, or wise saying or proverb, which is mai kaula'i na ʻiwi kala, which means do not dry your bones or air or present your bones in the light of day or in the sun. In other words, and this is a very free sharing here, so understand too that even this conversation, it has its kapu to it as well. So it's not meant to go and vala'au and talk about this and that. And we have the expert. One of the actually many experts today, but he's a warrior. So these kinds of things we have to remember that we're creating a little pu'uhonua here. People are going to listen to all this conversation and maybe not really understand. But if you don't understand, you don't really need to understand, because people have been trained and maybe guided. Alaka'i ia and Kūpuna, guided by their grandparents or ancestors. And again, back to Molokai, Kumuhula Harriet Ne, the grandmother of Oinei. That was a great way to start this very important discussion. Kahua, and then Honokahua. So ke kahua bamua, ke kaupoku mahope. So you build the foundation first, and then the roof goes after.
I look forward to the mele.
Okay.
Did he just kawaha you? Like,
He did.
ho kuleana ya oi?
You know, he can
Manu,
kawoha him. He's
yeah.
kawoha me before.
You know, so Halealoha, the work continues. Hui malama i ngā Kūpuna o Hawaii nei has since dissolved, but Hui ʻiwi kua mo'o is the organization that's taking on and continuing that mo'okuaha of work that, you know, has brought home over 6,500 Kūpuna, and it's still on that quest. What's left this year for you guys? Are you guys still gonna, is there other places you're gonna holo to return?
Unfortunately, when people ask me, so how well are things going? And the answer is we don't have any clue because there's no registry of all stolen items from Hawaii.
Right.
And so every time we think we've done a lot, we find out there are more. So there's still work to be done in Europe. The one country that has been absolutely, you know, oppressive when it comes to these kinds of issues is Russia. So hopefully not too much longer.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, and that we'll be able to bring them home. But let me share this last thought. When we did repatriation, it came with the realization that what we were trying to do was restore respect to Hawaiian humanity. And what we realized we were actually also doing was restoring their humanity as well.
Yeah.
Right.
And telling them, you know what? We forgive you and your ancestors and for what you did to us. Because what we started to realize was the museum people today are kaumaha.
Yeah.
Because they're smart and imagine the courage it takes to atone for something you didn't do, but your predecessors did, and to accept responsibility for it, to atone for it, to apologize for it. It was their way. I mean, by our Kūpuna coming home, they were forgiven, and healing is the goal. So, Cambridge was what illuminated that idea to me, because I realized that the Cambridge people, they were tasting the Kool-Aid of humanity, perhaps for the first time.
Yeah.
Right.
And they loved it. And they wanted more.
He uses the term that the museum people whose humanity, a great way to flip that over. But the word kaumaha, and kaumaha in Hawaiian, it can mean sad, but it also means heavily burdened. And so so for all of you, e kalahui Hawaii, remember too that many elements of our culture we could describe as koʻikoʻi. Koʻikoʻi means very, very deep and important, and also kapu, which means it's not meant for everyone. So this is a great ha'avina. And also remember too, I think sometimes we think it as Hawaiians that only things happen to us. But I think Halealoha mentioned earlier that there are things, ʻiwi Kūpuna or ancestral remains and artifacts from cultures all over the world in every place they don't belong. So I just think that, but thanks to you, he koa vivo ole oi. He's just a brave warrior to take on this, because that hana is koʻikoʻi too. That's why from time to time when he comes to Honolulu, I gotta lighten him up a little bit, and that's just what I do.
It doesn't take much though to lighten him up. Mahalo nui again, halealoha. My brother, who has done so much work, the kind of work that takes a lifetime of commitment, which he's definitely pursued. He's also in that phase of his life, of your life, where you are doing what Edward and Pualani Kanahele did, which was groom the next generation to go out and be able to do this work, hoping that we work ourselves out of a job, right? That absolutely. You will not have to.
They are my retirement plan.
Yes.
Antipua Kanahele, Panaeva and Hilo really taught us, many of us, that this is all about cycles.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Cycles of life, cycles of hi'iaka, cycles of the a'ali'i and the lehua. And that means that don't think that what we're doing right now is the end all. Right. Because if we don't continue, we don't ho'omau by teaching others and getting them interested. That's a hard thing to do today. To even get the young people interested. It's hard to get some of the old people interested.
Right.
But again, it's very specified. But I just remember that cycles happen over and over again over the hundreds and thousands of years. So we're just dust in the wind. Is that a song?
Mahalo, Manu, and especially mahalo. Sure.
The difference between when we started in 1988 and the training that's going on now is tremendous because the Hawaiian of today are far better equipped because they're all Hawaiian language speakers.
And they have
for the reasons that he talked about with the
identity.
program.
And mahalo for that.
Mahalo
So
for
the
that.
the pule that are done, the ceremony that are done are just, they start off at such a higher level now. Yeah. One of the things that I want to leave you all with is Halealoha sent me a text before the show, talked about the difference between Manaʻo and Ike. And, you know, he said, oh, I don't know if the show should be called Midday Manaʻo because, you know, we share Ike on there and there's a difference. You know what, Halealoha, I agree. And mahalo nui. We're going to keep the show Midday Manaʻo because it just sounds better.
Okay, wait. I have a
mahalo, right?
Wait.
But
I have an
mahalo nui.
alternative. Midday mana.
Yeah,
With
or midday
Mehana.
mana. Yeah.
Or midday
Yeah.
malu. Or midday.
Oh, Malu.
You know, but Ike, mahalo for all your Ike. We are slowly degrading in that right now. So I'm going to end the show right now. Mahalo again to Kaiser Permanente Community Benefit Fund and, of course, the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement. And mahalo to all of you. We will see you again here next week on Midday Manaʻo. Ahui ho kako.
Mahalo.